The 7 Years' War, the First Global War. A world on the brink. By the middle of the 18th century, Europe was living under an illusion of balance. Treaties had ended previous wars, borders had been redrawn, and monarchs spoke of stability. But beneath this fragile calm, rivalries were intensifying. Empires were no longer competing only for European territories, but for control of oceans, colonies, trade routes, and resources scattered across the globe. Britain and France were locked in a silent struggle for imperial supremacy. Austria was determined to recover lands it had lost. Prussia, young and ambitious, sought to defend its rise among Europe's great powers. What followed was not just another European war, but a conflict that engulfed multiple continents and reshaped the modern world. The 7 Years' War did not erupt suddenly. It was the product of decades of unresolved tension. Previous conflicts, especially the War of the Austrian Succession, had left behind bitterness, unfinished business, and wounded pride. Silesia, a wealthy and strategically vital region, had been seized by Prussia from Austria. This loss haunted the Habsburg monarchy and became a central motive for revenge. At the same time, British and French colonies were expanding aggressively, often colliding in distant lands where European treaties held little meaning. The world was becoming too interconnected for wars to remain local. The diplomatic revolution. One of the most striking aspects of the 7 Years' War was the dramatic shift in alliances that preceded it. For centuries, France and Austria had been bitter enemies, repeatedly fighting for dominance in Europe. Britain, meanwhile, had often aligned with Austria to counter French power. But by the 1750s, strategic interests had changed. Austria saw Prussia as its greatest threat, not France. Britain viewed France as its primary rival overseas, especially in North America and India. This realignment, often called the diplomatic revolution, shocked contemporaries. Austria allied itself with France and Russia, while Britain formed an alliance with Prussia. These new coalitions reflected a new reality. Wars were no longer fought solely for dynastic claims, but for global influence. When Frederick II of Prussia launched a preemptive invasion of Saxony in 1756, he ignited a conflict that these alliances would rapidly expand. In Europe, the war became a brutal struggle for survival, especially for Prussia. Surrounded by powerful enemies on nearly every front, Frederick the Great faced Austria to the south, Russia to the east, France to the west, and Sweden to the north. Prussia's army was smaller, but highly disciplined and innovative. Frederick relied on speed, maneuver warfare, and precise coordination to compensate for numerical inferiority. Battles such as Rossbach and Leuthen in 1757 showcased Prussian tactical brilliance. Against larger Franco-Austrian forces, Frederick achieved decisive victories that stunned Europe. These successes elevated Prussia's status and turned Frederick into a legendary military figure. Yet victory was never assured. The war dragged on, draining manpower and resources. Entire regions were devastated, civilians suffered immensely, and European economies strained under the cost of constant mobilization. Russia emerged as one of Prussia's most dangerous opponents. Russian armies advanced deep into Prussian territory, even briefly occupying Berlin. For a moment, Prussia's destruction seemed inevitable. Only a sudden political shift in Russia, following the death of Empress Elizabeth, spared Frederick from total defeat. The new Russian leadership withdrew from the war, dramatically altering its course. A war beyond Europe. While European armies clashed on familiar battlefields, the 7 Years' War was simultaneously being fought across oceans. In North America, the conflict had already begun before formal declarations of war. British and French colonists competed fiercely for control of the Ohio Valley, a vast and fertile region critical for expansion and trade. These struggles escalated into open warfare involving colonial militias, European regular troops, and Native American nations, each pursuing their own interests. For indigenous peoples, the war was not simply a European conflict transplanted to their lands. It was a fight for survival, autonomy, and influence. Many tribes allied with the French, who were perceived as less threatening to territorial sovereignty than British settlers. Others sided with the British, hoping to secure protection or advantage over rival tribes. The result was a complex and often tragic web of alliances that reshaped the balance of power in North America. The turning point came in 1759, a year the British would later call their Year of Victories. The capture of Quebec, following the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, effectively ended French dominance in Canada. The death of both commanding generals symbolized the high cost of imperial ambition. From that moment on, France's position in North America rapidly collapsed. India and the struggle for empire. In India, the war took on a different but equally significant form. Rather than large European-style armies clashing directly, the conflict revolved around influence, trade, and alliances with local rulers. The British East India Company and French colonial authorities competed to dominate key regions, using military force to protect commercial interests. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked a decisive moment. Through a combination of military action, political intrigue, and betrayal, British forces secured control over Bengal, one of the richest regions in India. This victory did more than weaken French influence. It laid the foundations for British colonial rule over the Indian subcontinent. What began as a commercial rivalry would eventually transform into direct imperial domination, affecting millions of lives for generations. Naval power and global reach. Underlying every theater of the 7 Years' War was the growing importance of naval power. Control of the seas meant control of supply lines, colonies, and global trade. Britain's powerful navy allowed it to strike French possessions across the world, from the Caribbean to Africa and Asia. French ports were blockaded, colonial reinforcements intercepted, and overseas territories left vulnerable. Spain's entry into the war on France's side further expanded the conflict. British forces captured key Spanish ports and colonies, including Havana and Manila, demonstrating the truly global nature of the war. No ocean remained untouched. The conflict revealed that future wars would be decided not only on land, but by the ability to project power across vast distances. The cost of victory. By 1763, exhaustion forced the warring powers to negotiate peace. The Treaty of Paris redrew the global map. France ceded Canada and vast territories east of the Mississippi River to Britain, effectively ending its North American empire. In India, French influence was reduced to minor trading posts. Britain emerged as the dominant global power, with an empire unmatched in scale and reach. In Europe, the Treaty of Hubertusburg confirmed Prussia's control of Silesia, securing its place among the great powers. Austria failed to recover the territory it so desperately wanted, while Russia withdrew without territorial gains. On paper, European borders changed little, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. Yet victory came at a tremendous cost. Britain's triumph left it deeply in debt. Maintaining and defending its expanded empire required money, administration, and soldiers. To solve this problem, the British government turned to its American colonies, imposing new taxes and regulations. These measures, meant to stabilize the empire, instead ignited resentment and resistance. Seeds of future revolutions. The consequences of the 7 Years' War extended far beyond 1763. In North America, colonial anger over taxation and lack of political representation grew steadily, leading directly to the American Revolution. In France, the loss of empire and the financial burden of the war weakened the monarchy, contributing to the economic crisis that would eventually spark the French Revolution. The war also changed how conflicts were understood. It demonstrated that wars were no longer confined by geography. Decisions made in European courts could devastate communities in America, India, and Africa. The 7 Years' War revealed a world increasingly interconnected, where power, economy, and warfare were inseparable. The First Global War. Historians often describe the 7 Years' War as the first true world war, not because it involved every nation, but because it linked distant regions into a single, unified conflict. It reshaped empires, accelerated colonial expansion, and set in motion revolutionary forces that would redefine nations and identities. More than a struggle between kings and generals, it was a war that transformed the structure of global power. Its echoes can be heard in the rise of modern empires, the birth of new nations, and the realization that no conflict, once ignited, could ever again remain confined to a single continent.